Hello and welcome. Because I've mentioned aquarelle colors in my last video as one of my go-to art supplies, I thought it would be cool to do a video on them and how they are different from normal watercolors. But I soon found out that that's a little tricky, and here's why. After some short research on some of the English terms for everything related to watercolors, I found out something interesting. There's just no term for normal watercolors. How we say in Austria, Deckfarben, I guess, opaque colors, because the English term watercolor just means aquarelle color. Well, I still want to make a comparison though, because clearly there is a difference regarding the paint. Just let's call the aquarelle colors expensive watercolors or high quality watercolors, I guess, and the Deckfarben qualitatively lower watercolors or cheaper watercolors. Moving on to the differences in theory. So in theory, aquarelle colors or the more expensive watercolors just have a higher amount of pigment and less fillers like chalk, and are therefore more intense and brighter in color, and on the other hand more translucent. Cheaper watercolors use more filler material such like chalk and are therefore more opaque and not so bright and intense in color. But enough of the talking, let's just try it out. Oh, and just so you get an idea what I've meant with expensive and less expensive colors, the high quality colors are about 35 euros, whereas the low quality watercolors were about 8 euros. So there's a big difference, I think. I'm just gonna paint red squares for a comparison on how intense the colors are. I don't know if the camera picks it up, but the aquarelle colors have a lot more pigment to them. I think you will notice it better when the colors are dried up. Now moving on with the comparison. In my last video I've mentioned that you can, to a certain point, erase high quality watercolors, and I just want to show you that. So here are the low quality watercolors. And on to the high quality watercolors. I think you can already notice a very big difference in the intensity of the color itself. Now to erase them, just dip your pencil into some water and go over the color again. In my opinion, that worked well with both of the colors. Still, I think the more expensive colors faded better into the white than the less expensive colors did. And if you want to do fades between two different colors, don't use too much water. I always tend to use too much water, by the way, and just dip in the second color lightly with your brush. Otherwise you get blooming, that's another effect you can go for, but if you want a smooth fade, then that's not what you want. Later on you will see what I mean with that, because I want to show you the blooming technique too. So, as you can see here, I really just dab in the color very lightly. And it will fade automatically because, yeah, that's what watercolors do. Moving on to another technique called layering, where you, as the name says, just layer the colors. And for that you have to wait till one layer is completely dry and then go over it with another layer. I tried it here with orange and yellow, but the two colors are just a little bit too similar, so the camera wouldn't pick up the effect properly. So here we go again with blue and yellow. Let's see how they turn out. In theory, this should work out better with the more expensive watercolors because they are more translucent, but let's just see. Well, I think I picked up way too much color here. But yeah, you will see the result is very smudgy, whereas the more expensive watercolors worked out fine, I guess. And now let's do a comparison on this blooming technique I mentioned earlier. This is a wet in wet technique, so as the name says, you paint wet in wet, and you can use much more water here than when you just want to do fades. Yeah, this was my cat. I think he just wanted to check what's going on here. You can see I just go over it very randomly. Moving on to the cheaper watercolors. Let's see how they turn out. The shade of orange is already very different, I have to say. As for now, it works out great, but let's wait till the paint is really dry. This is another watercolor technique called the dry brush technique, where you just use little to no water and yeah, just color to get this scrapey effect. So here I think there's really little to no difference at all. And last but not least, I wanted to try out some fades again, but they didn't work out that great, I think. Because with the cheap watercolors, you can see you just move around the pigments, but they don't really mix up that well. And with the more expensive watercolors, well, the red pigment was just too strong, so it covered up the yellow almost completely. But you will notice when the colors are all dried up, the more expensive watercolors really don't look too bad. Here I've tried putting the colors side by side first and then try to blend them together, and this worked out, yeah, pretty nicely, I think. And here you have it, the comparison between cheap and expensive watercolors. I think the differences are very subtle, but there are differences. Maybe it's just personal, but I just like the effect of the more expensive watercolors more, but it's not like there's a very big difference. Here you can see the fade and the layering. Yeah, this went really smudgy. Here you can see my failed attempts at fades, but nevertheless, here I really noticed the intensity of the more expensive colors. But I want to test them out on a real painting too, so let's go! I have decided to draw my two cats, because they look very similar too, but can behave, well, very differently from each other. Like the two types of color I'm using. Well, if that makes any sense. And here he comes again. Well, he's very attention-seeking and I'm drawing his sister here, so yeah, he doesn't like that all too much. Anyways, moving on again. In case you're wondering, I've decided to make them both blue and the flowers and her head yellow. or like in a orange brownie tone. And yeah, so these are the more expensive watercolors I'm using here. And here I've tried out to paint wet and wet and to layer them. I mean, if you can call it layering, because I'm using the same color. But I think you know what I mean. On some points I wanted to have a clear edge, and in other cases I just wanted this blooming effect because I really like it. While the first painting dries up, I think I will visit my boy and see what he's up to. It was very hard to focus on the filming and not getting scratched at the same time. Yep, this one has killer claws. Maybe you've already noticed it, but I'm wearing a band-aid on my right hand. Yeah, this was him too. He's very playful. So I think I'm able to concentrate once more and yeah, to move on. Nope, he still wants more attention. I'm already drawing you. What do you want? Get down again. Yes, I know, jumping on tables is really exciting. I promise I will show you the painting when I'm finished, okay? Oh, the struggle when owning a curious cat. But well, let's move on. Oh, and here I'm of course using the cheaper watercolors, so you guys have a comparison at the end. And here it is, a side comparison of cheap watercolors used on the right side and here the expensive watercolors on the left side. Voila! I'm really curious now what Nick's opinion is to the drawing. In conclusion, I think that there's not that much of a difference between the two kinds of color, but I just like the feeling of painting with real aquarelle colors a little bit more. But I think that's just a personal preference. So what do you guys think worked out best? I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and yeah, see you next time. Bye!